You finally get the keys. The papers are signed. The lender approved everything. The moving truck is parked outside. Friends congratulate you. Family members tell you how proud they are. For years, buying a home felt like one of those milestones that existed somewhere in the future. Something responsible adults eventually did. And now it is yours. The front door opens. The rooms are empty. The walls still smell fresh. You walk through without a real estate agent standing behind you. You stand in the living room for a few seconds longer than necessary because after months of searching, negotiating, inspections, and stress, it finally happened. There is a quiet satisfaction in the empty rooms that is hard to name and harder to explain to someone who has not felt it. You are a homeowner. For a little while that feeling is exactly what you expected. Something shifts. You feel settled. Like you finally crossed a line that had been sitting out in the distance for years. The mortgage is $1,847 a month. You ran that number so many times you know it the way you know your phone number. It fits. You budgeted for it. You are ready. That feeling lasts about 4 months. Nobody lies to you about buying a home. That is the strange part. The realtor does not lie. The bank does not lie. Your parents do not lie. Everyone just tells you the part of the story they know and leaves out the part they never thought to mention because nobody mentioned it to them either. What they tell you: the mortgage payment, the down payment, the interest rate, the closing costs if you are lucky. What they do not tell you: everything else. And everything else is where the real number lives. The real number is not $1,847. The real number is closer to $3,200. Sometimes more. And the gap between those two figures is what nobody puts on the brochure. Think about the month you moved in. The inspection found nothing structural. Clean bill of health. What the inspector did not mention, because it was not his job to mention it, was that the water heater was 11 years old. Average lifespan is 12. You find this out 9 months after closing when it starts leaking on a Sunday evening. You're standing in the laundry room in your socks, watching water spread across the floor, and for a moment you just stare at it because you have no idea what you are supposed to do next. The replacement costs $1,400 installed. You pay it. You add it to a mental list you did not know you were starting. 3 months later the HVAC makes a sound. Not a catastrophic sound. Just a sound that was not there before. The technician comes out for $89 and tells you the capacitor is going. The repair is $340. He also mentions conversationally that the unit is 14 years old and you should start thinking about replacement in the next 2 to 3 years. A new HVAC system runs between $5,000 and $9,000 depending on the house. You thank him and write the check and go back inside and sit in the kitchen for a while. This is not bad luck. This is ownership. The house is not broken. It's just getting older. And now every problem it develops belongs to you. Here is what nobody gave you when you signed the paperwork. Property taxes. In most American counties, property taxes run between 1% and 2% of the assessed value annually. On a $312,000 home, that is between $3,120 and $6,240 a year. Call it $4,500 in your area. That is $375 a month that does not appear in the mortgage payment your loan officer quoted you. Some loans escrow this. Many do not fully account for the annual increases. Your assessed value goes up. Your tax bill follows. Homeowner's insurance. Not the cheap number. The real number after your first renewal in a market where carriers are repricing risk across the country. In many states, homeowners insurance has increased 20 to 40% in the last 3 years. Budget $2,000 to $3,000 annually for a modest home. That is another $200 to $250 a month. PMI. If you put less than 20% down, and most first-time buyers do, you are paying private mortgage insurance on top of the mortgage itself. Typically 0.5 to 1.5% of the loan amount annually. On a $250,000 loan, that is $1,250 to $3,750 a year. Another $100 to $300 a month gone before you touch a single thing in the house. Maintenance. This is the number that surprises people most because it does not arrive as a single bill. It arrives as 12 separate smaller shocks across the year. The rule of thumb used by most financial planners is 1 to 2% of the home's value annually for maintenance and repairs. On a $312,000 home, that is $3,120 to $6,240 a year. Spread across 12 months, that is $260 to $520 every month that you should be setting aside. Most homeowners do not set it aside. They pay it reactively, usually on credit, usually at the worst possible moment. Add it up. Mortgage $1,847. Property taxes $375. Insurance $225. PMI $150. Maintenance reserve $350. You are now at $2,947 a month before you have replaced a single light bulb or mowed the lawn once. And you have not yet replaced the water heater, the HVAC, the roof, which is 12 years left according to the inspector, but which will need replacement in your ownership window, the windows that are original to the 1998 construction, the driveway that is starting to crack in 2 places, or the electrical panel that a contractor will mention casually during a future renovation as something you should look at. The trap is not that owning a home is a bad decision. It is not. For most people in most circumstances, it is a reasonable long-term financial move with real equity-building potential and the kind of stability that changes how you plan a life. The trap is the gap between the costs people imagine and the costs they eventually experience. The mortgage payment says one thing. Reality says another. Call it the ownership gap. The distance between what you think the house will cost and what the house actually costs once real life begins. And that gap is wide enough to derail a financial life that was otherwise pointed in the right direction. Here is what that gap does to people who did not plan for it. The first response is the credit card. The water heater goes, and the checking account does not have $1,400 sitting in it because nobody told you to have $1,400 sitting in it for this specific reason. So it goes on the card. Then the capacitor. Then the fence. Then the bathroom faucet that starts dripping in a way that is expensive to ignore. The card balance grows. The minimum payment joins the monthly obligations. The budget that worked at $1,847 does not work at $1,847 plus $185 in credit card minimums, plus the next thing that breaks. You start doing the math at night sometimes. You lie in bed and add up what you have spent in the last 12 months on things that were not in the original plan. It is never a small number. The second response is the home equity line. Once there is enough equity, some homeowners open a HELOC and start using the house to pay for the house, which works mathematically until you realize you are borrowing against an asset to maintain an asset, adding debt that has to be repaid with interest, and essentially funding the cost of ownership with the ownership itself. The equity that was supposed to build your net worth is now servicing the cost of the physical object. The third response is deferred maintenance. You stop repairing things that are not immediately catastrophic. The crack in the driveway stays cracked. The window that does not seal properly gets a strip of weatherproofing tape. The gutters get cleaned every 3 years instead of every year. Deferred maintenance is the most expensive response of all because the deferred thing costs significantly more to fix later than it would have cost to address when it first appeared. The crack becomes a structural issue. The window becomes a moisture problem. The gutters become a foundation issue. The cost of avoidance always exceeds the cost of maintenance. Always. You start to feel it in small ways. You hesitate before saying yes to plans with friends because money feels tighter than it should on a salary that should have more room in it. You tell yourself you will replace the fence next summer, then the summer after that. You start measuring every purchase against the invisible list of things the house might need soon. The house that was supposed to represent financial arrival starts feeling like the thing holding everything else back. The person who navigates this well is not the person who earns more. It is the person who knew the real number before they signed, built the buffer before they needed it, and treated the house as a financial instrument that requires active management rather than a purchase that is finished once the check clears. What that looks like in practice is straightforward, even if it is not exciting. Before you buy, you calculate the fully loaded monthly cost, not the mortgage payment. The actual all-in number. Mortgage plus taxes plus insurance plus PMI, if applicable, plus 1% of the purchase price divided by 12 for the maintenance reserve. If that number does not fit the budget, the house does not fit the budget. The mortgage payment fitting is not the same thing as the house fitting. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in the buying decision. You build the maintenance fund before you need it. Ideally, before you close, you have 3 to 6 months of mortgage payments in an emergency fund and separate maintenance reserve of at least $5,000. Not the same account. Separate, labeled, untouched for anything other than the house. The water heater failing at 11 p.m. on a Sunday is a $1,400 inconvenience when that fund exists. Is a financial emergency and a credit card charge when it does not. You do the inspection differently. You go with the inspector for the full walk. You ask the age of every major system. You ask when each was last serviced. You build a replacement timeline before you close, so you know the roof has 12 years, the HVAC has 3, the water heater has 1, and you start funding those replacements immediately rather than waiting for them to fail at the worst possible time. You treat property taxes and insurance as monthly expenses, not annual surprises. You calculate the monthly equivalent and set it aside every month in a dedicated sub-account so that when the tax bill arrives in November, it is already sitting there waiting. None of this is complicated. All of it requires knowing the real number before you commit to mortgage. That is the only thing separating the homeowner who builds wealth through the house from the homeowner who spends 15 years maintaining an asset that barely moves their net worth. Here is what changes when you go in with the full picture. The purchase decision becomes clearer. You might choose a different house, not because you cannot afford the mortgage on the $312,000 home, but because you cannot afford the fully loaded cost of a home that needs significant system replacement in the next 3 years. The $285,000 house 2 miles away with a newer roof and a 4-year-old HVAC looks completely different when you are comparing total cost of ownership rather than just mortgage payments. The anxiety that follows most homeowners, the specific low-grade dread of not knowing what is about to break and whether you can handle it, largely disappears when a maintenance fund is real and funded. Not because nothing breaks. Things always break. But the breakdown shifts categories. It becomes a logistical problem rather than a financial crisis. And the equity builds away it is supposed to. Because you are not borrowing against it to fund repairs. Because you are not adding to the debt load through a HELOC to cover what deferred maintenance eventually demands. The asset is actually building, which is what you bought it to do. The house is not the problem. The purchase is not the mistake. Most people who buy a home and hold it for 10 to 15 years in a reasonable market come out ahead. The equity accumulates. The fixed payment looks better every year as rent around them rises. The stability compounds in ways that are genuinely real, even if they are hard to put in a spreadsheet. The mistake is confusing the mortgage payment with the cost of ownership. Those are two different numbers, and the distance between them, that $1,000 to $1,300 monthly gap that nobody puts in the brochure, is what separates the people who built wealth through home ownership from the people who spent 15 years maintaining an asset that produced almost nothing because every dollar of equity was absorbed by every dollar of reactive unplanned cost. You're going to own a home, or you already do. The question is whether the number you are running is the real number, because the real number changes everything. What you can actually afford. What you need in reserve, what the house produces for your financial life over the time you own it. The house is a genuinely good investment when you go in with the complete picture. It is an expensive and exhausting trap when you go in with just the mortgage payment and a feeling that the rest will work itself out. If this was the number nobody showed you before you bought, or if you are getting close to buying and you want the complete picture before you sign, subscribe. Because there is a lot more of this conversation that the brochure leaves out, and we cover it here every week.